Hello, I'm John Adams of Perry & Phillips. Today I'm with John Levett, the CEO of the NAFD. So thank you for coming in today, John.
Great to be here.
So first then, what is the NAFD? What is it there for?
Well, NAFD is the main trade body for funeral directors in the UK. So what is a trade body? Well, essentially, it's a body that funeral directors can join, and our membership ranges from big companies like the Co-op and Dignity to, very, very small independents. First of all, we provide a series of benefits for our members. But I think the most important thing that we do is provide assurance to the public that those funeral homes in our membership are operating to a certain standard. For example, any funeral business which is in NAFD membership has to adhere to a code of practice. All funeral homes in our membership are inspected every 2 years. So we've got inspectors who will go out unannounced. They will just turn up on the day, and they will look around the premises and check that high standards are being maintained in that funeral home. I think that's really, really important stuff that we do.
So with that then, if the standards aren't there in that funeral home, what happens then?
Let's say an inspection takes place and the inspector finds that there are certain problems in that funeral home. We will work with that funeral home to get them up to the correct standard. But in the worst case, there is then a process whereby we can essentially sanction that funeral home, and ultimately they could be removed from membership.
So there is potential for sort of licensing regulation in the industry now. How will that affect? Does that fall into line with those inspections?
Yeah. I mean, I think NAFD's role will change a little bit, because if there is a regulator, a lot of those inspections and so on will probably fall under the regulator's remit rather than NAFD's. I think our role, there will still be a big role for NAFD for supporting our members and helping them to achieve compliance with whatever the regulatory requirements are. One of the big issues that we think exists at the moment is that of course, membership with NAFD is voluntary.
Yeah.
It is, a funeral home can decide that they don't want to belong to NAFD.
Yeah.
And if they're outside of that, they're not subject to a code of practice, there is no inspection regime or anything like that to check that they're operating to a certain standard. So from a member of the public's point of view, I think one of the things that they need to do is to check before they engage a funeral director, is this funeral director a member of NAFD? Are they subject to a code of practice? What happens if things do go wrong? Yeah. It's pretty rare that things go wrong, but what happens? What redress is there if things go wrong?
Because again, part of the membership of the NAFD as well, you have the NAFD Resolve.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. Can you explain that for us, please?
Yeah, so NAFD Resolve is a system whereby if something's gone wrong with the funeral, it's pretty rare, it doesn't happen very often, but occasionally it does, and the client is unhappy with what's happened and hasn't been able to resolve the issue with the funeral director to their satisfaction, they can make a complaint to NAFD. We will look at that complaint, and in most cases what will happen, we then refer it on to an independent body who will look at the complaint, and they will essentially mediate between the funeral director and the client to hopefully come up to a resolution. If it doesn't resolve through this, what's called the conciliation process, it then goes on to the next stage, which is adjudication, which essentially is where that independent person will say, well, okay, I'm going to look at this. I'm going to make a decision as to what should happen. And then that is binding on the funeral director. Yeah. So it's an important backstop for clients. Yeah. Just in case, in those rare occasions something go wrong, that they're not able to resolve it with the funeral director directly, they've got this sort of backstop that they can go to.
And again, it's further evidence that the NAFD are trying to raise standards across the industry, really.
Absolutely. And it's really important that that process is independent.
Yeah.
We look at it, but we then send it off to an independent company which is expert in dealing with those kind of issues.
So the education is a big part of what the NAFD do as well. How does that work?
It's a really important part of NAFD, and I think it's going to become an increasingly important part of our work going forward. Essentially, there are qualifications which funeral directors and their staff can take, and we're now looking at our framework of qualifications. So it covers the entire funeral workforce, right from those who are new starters who have just joined a funeral business, through to more experienced funeral directors who can take what is our diploma in funeral directing, which is a higher level qualification. So there's a sort of escalator, if you like, of qualifications at different levels. And again, this is all part of our standards work, really. It's making sure that when somebody goes to a funeral director, that they're dealing with someone who's got appropriate qualifications for the role that they're in. At the moment, this is all voluntary, but I think when regulation comes in, I suspect having certain levels of qualification will be compulsory. You won't be able to practice unless you've got the appropriate level of qualification.
Exciting for the industry, isn't it?
Really exciting.
So back to the support and standards. With the pandemic that just happened recently, what was the NAFD's involvement in that, in preparing and supporting their members?
Yeah, huge. I mean, it was huge. It was an incredibly busy time, and of course, new regulations came in which restricted attendance at funerals. Those regulations did change at various points during the pandemic, and a big part of what we had to do was get quite quick communications out to our members to say, often it was literally, from tomorrow, this is what the law says you've got to do. There was also a lot of issues. Funeral directors, sadly, suffered all the same issues that health and social care professionals did around personal protective equipment, PPE. There were shortages of PPE. NAFD worked really hard behind the scenes to make sure that funeral directors were able to get access to the national supply, because normally funeral directors buy their PPE from commercial operators. Commercial operators had none. They'd run out of stock. So we worked hard behind the scenes, talking to government and making sure that there was this backstop for funeral directors, that if they didn't have appropriate personal protective equipment for their staff, that they could access the national supply through local resilience forums. I guess the main thing that we did, where there are issues, we would take them to government and lobby them and say, this is going to be a problem.
So an example of that was even with the key workers initially. That was an example of that.
We had to lobby hard for that. And initially we were quite worried that funeral directors would get overlooked in having key worker status. And of course that would have been really problematic for funeral staff. For example, unlike other occupations, you couldn't work from home. So what do you do if your child is not going to school? Whereas, of course, for key workers, their children were able to go to school, which enabled their parents to go to work. So it's really important that funeral directors got that status. So it's a really good example
on behalf of the industry, thank you for the work you've done during the COVID crisis. It was a great support. The communication throughout as well was really helpful and clear. So thank you for what you've done. So the CMA, the Competition Market Authority, have been carrying out an investigation into funerals for the last 24 months. What's your view on that, and where do you think that's going to go to?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag for us. I think we're currently looking at the what's called the provisional decision report of the Competition Markets Authority. I think we're really pleased that one of the things that we've already talked about was around quality regulation. And they have made a recommendation to government, or they will we think they'll be making a recommendation to government that there should be quality regulation of the funeral sector. One of the issues that they'd raised is that some funeral directors haven't been as transparent as they could be around their pricing, and in particular, have perhaps been a little bit slow to do things like put their prices online. And they are making recommendations, or actually they'll be going further than recommendations, making it law. And we support that. We think that's a really, really good move, because increasingly that's how people are choosing their funeral director. We've got some concerns around the CMA because I think although they're talking about finishing their investigation, they are aware, of course, that the COVID pandemic actually kind of disrupted their work really during the investigation, and I think they are feeling, because their investigation came to an end because it had to, because they worked to a statutory deadline, that there may be some unresolved issues. And they're talking about monitoring funeral directors going forward. I think we think that's just a bit over the top. You know, they've done the work. It's time to let the business get on with
Well,
things.
hopefully as well, the CMA will have seen the work that's taken place over the last 4 months during the pandemic, the great work that funeral homes have done across the whole United Kingdom. So hopefully that'll be taken into account as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and certainly, you know, one of the benefits of the CMA investigation is it has highlighted some of these issues, and maybe those who had been, for example, a little bit slow around putting their prices online have probably done it now anyway, because it's been highlighted as an issue. But as I say, I think the investigation's done, some good stuff's come out of it. It's really probably time to stop that now and just let the industry get on with it. And NAFD will certainly be supporting and making sure that the things that they've recommended and the things that they're saying that should be done will happen with our members.
Great, thank you, John. So there is a perception by some funeral firms that the NAFD is aimed more towards the larger corporate companies. What would you say to those companies?
Well, I think one of the great benefits of NAFD is it's an amalgamation of, within our membership, both those large members and small members. And actually, you know, at our events and our conferences and so on, it's a great opportunity for everybody to get together to discuss common issues. When I think about the benefits that we offer our members, it probably benefits the smaller members more, you know, because the larger members have got their own resources. For example, the education and training that we were talking about. A lot of our larger members have got their own training regimes in place because they can afford to do it. But the smaller independent member is not going to have those resources to do that. So I think a lot of our benefits are actually, you know, they are more tailored towards the smaller member than they are the larger member. But as I say, I think one of the great things is really that it's a chance for, you know, if you attend an NAFD conference as a smaller independent, you'll be sitting next to the big business owners from big guys, and you can talk about things.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's huge benefit to
I find that as well, how open the larger companies are, discussing practices, best practice.
Absolutely.
So there are lots of benefits, aren't there, in getting involved, really.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's been really interesting, that has, John. I know there's lots of things going on with yourself and the industry. What are your short-term targets for the NAFD then? What do you aim to do next?
Near targets, as I say, I think there's going to be a lot happening around regulation. And we really hope, fingers crossed, that the government will say actually everybody needs to be registered and subject to a code of practice, that it's not a voluntary thing that you do by joining a trade body, it's something that everybody has to do. I think there's a huge role for NAFD on the education side of things. I really do think that's going to be a big growth area for us, as more and more people will need to get qualified at a certain level. And I think, you know, there's so much that we can do, you know, thinking about events and so on, online learning and things like that. There's a whole host of support that we can give to funeral homes going forward. I think it's a really, really exciting time to be working in the funeral business.
Thank you, John. That's been really interesting and very almost exciting to see where it's going to go as well. So thank you again for coming in today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.